this podcast is made possible by the generosity of listeners like you. Kindly consider a contribution through Patreon or PayPal. Links are in the details box. Patreon is a monthly subscription that you can cancel anytime, and PayPal is a one-time donation. Any amount is appreciated. And follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, the handle, the Beirut Banyan. And you can find us on our YouTube channel with the same name, and you can start watching the episodes as they're released. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching. I'm Ronnie Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan. I'll start off by saying thank you. You're very kind to stay up past 9 p.m. to deal with me. So that's an honor. The second thing is that you found the perfect setting to do this episode. I haven't had a better background yet. This very lovely wall, this very intimate setting with the light. This is how every episode should be done. And maybe I should be sitting where you're sitting. It should be flipped in reverse. We met years ago on a different way of storytelling, different form of storytelling that I do, my Walk Beirut tour, and that your parents joined in 2012. So I'm happy that you saw me in my better form years ago. I have expired since. You look the same, so that's fine. It's me that's kind of falling apart. and also that you decided to do this episode in Mina. So you're the first person that I've interviewed in Mina.
I'm shocked.
And I'm saying Mina specifically for you, because I've interviewed many people in Tripoli, but you're the first in Mina, that distant land that everyone in Tripoli has never heard of, that sort of remote part of the world just down the street. So thank you for doing that, and for doing this episode in a place that you're sort of contributing to, that you're a part of, Aristos in Mina. So I'm going to start there. Maybe a happier story, a more sort of lighter subject. Tell me about this place. Remind me what it used to be before you took it over, and just the vibe of Mina right now. Because Mina for me is where I go every time I'm in Tripoli. I go straight to Mina. So just what Mina is like Thursday evening.
So Mina has, I think, for a long time been a bit of a refuge for the whole area of Tripoli. It's one of the rare places where you have a row of small pubs and restaurants. It's quite cozy. And so I was certainly drawn to it when I first came up here. A lot of people, even from originally from around here, who don't actually live here, might not even know it exists. Mm-hmm. So basically, I got involved with a small side project, doing experimenting to try and see if wine would work.
Okay.
On a street that's usually goes for hard alcohol and and maybe beer. And the idea was to focus on Lebanese wines because you could always get kind of random deals on French wine or Spanish wine at Spinneys. And usually the go-to would be Kasara or Kafreya,
right,
which are kind of the mass market wines, the Budweiser of wines of Lebanon. Or
oh, really?
What would be the mass market wine in the U.S. right now? The barefoot one, whatever it is.
I might steal that comparison from you. I've never heard of this one.
Do they still have that?
I don't. I'm not sure.
Anyway, I'm getting a bit local from the U.S. end.
Sure.
But long story short, the idea was to focus on just the amazing diversity of Lebanese wine. And people might have an idea in their head that it's more expensive to go for a wine that's not mass market. But that's not really the case. So we are kind of focusing on this local, gift before all of this started. And now going local is not, a luxury. That's the name of the game right now. And one of my recent stories from my day job as a journalist was about the struggles of the beverage industry in Lebanon. And basically in a country coming to terms with how much is actually imported and maybe assembled in Lebanon, but not made in Lebanon.
Right.
So for example, the wine, the cork is from abroad. The glass bottle is from abroad. In many cases, the label is printed abroad.
Yeah.
And so while the grapes are Lebanese, that's still about 30% of the components from outside,
Right.
and necessitating foreign currency. For beer, for example, it's even more because the wheat is from outside. Stuff inside the bottle also needs to come from outside. So, I'm sure we're going to be getting into the economic situation. Basically, everybody in the country, whether, a business owner, consumer, is coming to terms with the reckoning over how much comes from outside and has demanded dollars and how little local production there is, which is going to need to change. And there's no immediate quick fix, to this kind of thing.
Sure.
So it's a painful reckoning right now because prices have to go up, but they can't go up so much as to alienate the customer base.
Right.
So this is what so many businesses are struggling with now in Lebanon, and I would say most of them are just trying to keep their heads above water.
Alison, I'm going to jump ahead a bit, only in that I'm going to refer to your Asia Times pieces, and one in particular that you actually just mentioned, Lebanon's beverage makers seek survival revival, which was, I think, just really 2 weeks ago or so, 2.5 weeks ago it was released. And before we get sort of too deep in the political and economic catastrophe we're witnessing, I'm just curious about your involvement right now in this pub. How long have you been involved yourself?
Since November.
So after the protests began, you
Yes.
became. The reason I'm curious about the exact time frame is I know Mina since Mono was happening. Now this is sort of dating myself and probably dating anyone who's listening, and maybe dating you too. I don't know. Mono, we're talking 20 years ago, some 15, 20 years ago, when Mono was really happening. And then Mina became Mino, sort of Mono's sort of younger sibling. And I would have so many fun nights in Mina. And I mean, that little street used to be so packed with locals and with sort of Lebanese from all over Lebanon, as well as tourists. It was very buzzing. That's quite some time ago. And ever since, I've just seen places closing over time. And on occasion, a place or two will reopen, only to shut down. So I'm curious about your own personal commitment to this place. What made you in November sort of do something that is quite Lebanese, if I can say, become a part owner of a pub? What made you go that route? Was it the optimism of the moment, or is it something unrelated that it just happened to in November that it sort of lined up that way? Because it's a very delicate time in recent history, and I think it also is probably the last time I vividly remember sincere hope and euphoria all over the country. So I'm just curious about November. What took you to Aristos in November?
Well, a few things. One of them is I was already, living outside Beirut.
I see.
When I moved back from Dubai, where I was working for AFP, one of my main things was I wanted to be kind of outside the bubble as much as possible. Not to say, that anyone's living in a bubble, but we tend to gravitate towards Beirut just because it's the capital for journalists that are frequently flying, usually to report elsewhere. That's the hub. That's where the airport is. But you also end up going to the same places and also living in an area that's not experiencing maybe the same thing as the rest of the country.
Yeah.
Just in, for example, the electricity cuts. When I lived in Ashrafiyeh, it's 3 hours a day, which is maybe the lowest in the whole country. That's changed now.
Yeah.
But it was certainly, you could live differently there. So I wanted to, kind of get out. And when the protests started in Lebanon, I decided that one of the things I really wanted to do was to not just cover people protesting,
Right.
but cover the people who are not protesting. Because I think that's something that sometimes I feel like we forget, even if a good chunk of the population is protesting, who is staying home and why? Are they supporting it silently, but they can't go? Are they against it? Are they afraid of instability? What are these people thinking and feeling? And also to just go outside of the capital to see what are the dynamics in different regions. So my first stop, what I went to, was in Baalbek, because I wanted to see what was happening there, because it seemed like if it was going to really be a big change, all areas of the country would be protesting in a big way.
Right.
What I found was protests, but definitely not everybody coming out en masse, which was something I think important to witness. And then from there, going to, the Bekaa Valley, small villages, to check in with contacts there.
Yeah.
People who were very skeptical and at the time said, these are good people. They want, of course, the politicians are corrupt, but this is all, about timing. This is not in our hands, and this is going to benefit America or Israel, for example. And then went over the mountains to the coast to Batroun, which of course is kind of a big place of support for the ruling at the time, Free Patriotic Movement, the party of the president, I guess I should say, because no one really rules in Lebanon, and the party of the foreign minister at the time, Gibran Bassil, to also get a feel for that. And it was also kind of a mixed bag. So that's been kind of my ethos, as I've kind of matured in my journalism career, to kind of get out of town and and B, talk to the people who aren't showing up in downtown Beirut and see how they're feeling and thinking. And along the way, when I was going over the mountains, I'm sure you know this artist road that's only open in the spring.
Sure.
And I just met, kind of people with whatever, sandwich shops on the side of the road, and people who, they were watching it on TV, they were interested, excited, but also even from that time when it was so optimistic, very nervous about, what was coming. And then I had the opportunity to go to Tripoli and Mina. In Mina, I went to check out this place called, it's the Old Khan in Al-Mina. Maybe you know it.
Sure, yeah.
It's this amazing old Mamluk building.
Yeah.
Where there's basically, I think it's the fourth generation of Syrians who came originally from Tartus, who have been squatting there for 4 generations. They're basically Lebanese. Some of them have intermarried with Lebanese, so they got the nationality. The men obviously cannot. Just to see how they were living and thinking and feeling. And, these are the people, some of them don't even have the nationality, and they were going down to the protests. So, and, people who are just living day by day, they're making fishing nets and selling them for, almost nothing, or fishing what they eat. So that's how I kind of stumbled upon Almina. And no, I don't think it was the protest or the optimism. I think it was just, I love to kind of, you know, find other ways outside my day job
Right.
to engage with people. And this small pub gave me the opportunity to kind of try on another passion of mine, which was Lebanese wine, and trying my hand at seeing if I could do a successful wine menu.
I'm going to just.
That's a long story.
No, but it's a great story, and I'll add to it in sort of my just thinking out. I'm thinking as you're speaking that in all the conversations I've done, I think this is the first one where it's almost like a deliberate attempt to include voices that are not necessarily celebrated given what we've seen the past 7-8 months. And that includes, I don't know if regime supporters is the right word or the right phrase here, but it's just Lebanese that are not fully on board. And they could be skeptical for many reasons. They could be apolitical as well. They could maybe nominally support the protest, but they're not protesting per se. So it's that kind of approach that I think this is the first time, which is good. It's a good thing. And the other one is when you're describing your trip around Lebanon, and I mean this sort of journey to Baalbek, up to Betroun, and then over the Cedars. I mean, one would think that you're traveling the world, right? You're just going 1 hour and maybe 30 minutes in one direction. But it's a very, very different opinion, a very different way of approaching problems, a very different focus at times. And I think that was the magic of the moment, is that enough people throughout the country saw eye to eye, maybe for the first time. That may have vanished already. But I just like imagining you kind of journeying around the country trying to collect opinions on what we've seen. And that you end up in Mina at the end. It's not like you went to the airport and flew away. You found your home in Mina. And I say this as somebody who's originally from the north. That no, you chose well.
Wherever you went, even in those early days, I mean, in Baalbek, for example, when there's this small crowd protesting, you go across the street to get sfeha, and the guy is just rolling his eyes and, at the whole thing.
Yeah.
You go to Betroun and someone says, oh, this is nice, but I think that's enough. I forget what had even happened, but they said, that's nice, that's enough. And then, in Tripoli even, I went to the fish market. It's downstairs from the Khan. And some of the fish dealers were just complaining, they were upset because of the roadblocks, because all their big customers were the restaurants in Jounieh and Jbeil, and they couldn't distribute. So it was interrupting, their work. And, so many people, especially outside Beirut and Mount Lebanon, are really living day to day. So I think that's something that, we have to keep in mind, that it's not about supporting, these existing dynasties that control things or not. I think people are pretty aware and pretty, I don't know. I think that they're also just very cognizant of what they have to lose.
Right.
And even if it doesn't seem like much, especially when it's, you're just getting by day to day.
And there's something else, and this may be a nice way to open up the economic sort of story that's at play. Yeah. I assume that whether you have Baalbek or Tripoli or anything in between, that if they're seeing things eye to eye, it's really on the economic pain, that there's a shared pain in the country. And you kind of allude to that I mean, people are living, it's a very difficult chapter. It's a very difficult economic chapter in Lebanese history. And I guess you yourself, being a small business owner in Mina, probably seeing it up front, that this is really a difficult time to survive. So that's, I think, that's the focus of the story. that there's a shared pain. Beyond that, there doesn't seem to be much agreement on anything. But let's start with the economic pain. And your Asia Times pieces, I mean, they go back before the protests started. They go back to 2018. I'm going to link it up to the episode because I think it's almost like a diary of everything that went wrong leading up to the protest movement. And then from October until today, it's almost like the stories that matter, but it's still nothing is going right. There's no real hope for political or economic change. And I'm just going to introduce a small piece that you wrote. I think it's maybe few days ago, actually. It may have been last week, June 30. Lebanon faces abyss as top technocrats jump ship. Now, I got to speak to Henri Shaul for the podcast.
Okay.
He's one of the two, and I'm trying to get Alain Bifani on as well. This is summer of 2020. This is 7-8 months since the protests started, and the situation seems so bleak. And then you have advisors or administrators in the Ministry of Finance who are leaving, who are saying, we can't do it, can't fix it. I'm throwing a big question on you, but I'd like to just maybe gauge your mind on this. And these conversations you're having, whether they're among friends or even sort of on these trips throughout the country, are you sensing any hope on the horizon? Is there anything that sort of makes you wonder that, okay, things are bad now, but they have to get better at some point? Or is it really as bleak to you as it seems to be to everyone watching and sort of witnessing not just hyperinflation or lines for bread or anything like that, just that there's despair. And it seems to be almost that it's very difficult to shy away from it right now.
Yeah. I mean, the resignation of those two technocrats, I would say they were, also trying to kind of send an SOS. So I think that we can't just say it was giving up. I think it was also, trying to send a warning signal and not try to, and I think so. I think it was a very, it was an action. It wasn't, a withdrawal, so to speak. As for the situation, I think there's two things I want to mention. One is something that a Lebanese colleague, Mina Today, pointed out to me, which was that Lebanese have never depended on the government to do anything for them.
Right.
I mean, case in point, the diaspora. And so you have dire statistics, and we can't downplay the impact of prices tripling and quadrupling with no anchor to when, or no bottom to that in sight. But you have many, from religious charities to neighborhood initiatives. For example, in Mina, there's a small charity that every day they have a different thing that they give to needy families. One day it's vegetables. One day it might be, the basic grains and whatnot. You have groups that are bundling monthly packages for families, the basics. And you have a lot of people that never trusted the banks. I mean, we're talking about wealthier people now that, have their safes or whatever. And I think that, there's also not this individualism that we have in the U.S. where, oh, that's too bad that's happening to you. If there's a friend who works in the Gulf, he'll send you money when you need it. And there's no shame in asking. If you have one family member that's making dollars for an NGO, they'll step up and help out the rest of the family.
Right.
You don't leave people behind. The huge issue is that everybody's sinking, and that the poorest people that don't have anyone in their network that has that, kind of capacity to absorb this or ride it out, those are the people that are really struggling
Yeah.
to put food on the table and get by. And the other thing I want to mention when we talk about, I can't say this is a positive, but it could be the silver lining, which is that now, for so long, because of the dollar peg, imports were basically somehow subsidized by keeping the dollar peg in place.
Mm-hmm.
And for anyone listening who hasn't been following the situation closely, that meant you could go to an ATM and withdraw dollars and Lebanese interchangeably.
Mm-hmm.
That's how much the economy was dollarized, and that's how much people could count on it. They could make money in Lebanese, put it in a bank account, and then if they were a merchant, whether buying a small salon supplier, importing glass, whatever, they could pay their suppliers in dollars without thinking. That's over. The government is still, providing the official exchange rate for the most basic commodities like wheat and fuel, supposedly. But if you see our electricity situation right now, you'll know that even that is definitely in peril. And so now there's going to need to be a renewed emphasis on local production. And that's not something that can happen overnight. It's going to take years. And it's not going to be easy because no one trusts the banks anymore. And if you want to start a factory or do anything, you usually need financing and you need loans. So it's actually, it's terrible that the banking sector is in such dire straits and doesn't appear to be, on the verge of a breakthrough as far as restructuring or whatever it's going to take to get it back on its feet. So this is a huge problem because right now, for example, the beverage story you mentioned, Lebanon doesn't have one glass factory. They have some smaller scale artisanal things, but there is no factory capable of the mass production that would take to supply.
I always found bizarre. Actually, that's something that I found out recently, and it seemed so bizarre. But sorry to interrupt you.
No. It's insane.
It's insane.
But it speaks to how easy it was and how much cheaper it was to get stuff from outside. I've met businessmen in Tripoli who they used to have factories to make jeans, but now if you want to make kind of the updated models of jeans with all like the laser cuts and whatever. Those machines are hundreds of thousands, maybe $1 million.
Yep.
And are you going to have the return when there's 6 million people in the country? The only way is, and add to that, you could export. You have to export to make back your money. But the problem is, you're up against countries that have normal electricity that aren't paying double for a generator. You're up against countries where the industrial sector might be supported by the government. So that's why, there are many reasons why manufacturing is in the state it is. But I think that now that the lira has sunk so low, and now that people are realizing they're not going to be able to buy the imported goods like before, whether it's Pampers or glass bottles from Europe. There's going to need to be local production, probably in the medium term. They'll be buying from maybe cheaper sources like Egypt or Syria or maybe, wherever they can find a deal to get them through this period. And you have amazing stories of people, how they're adapting in the near term, where there's a winery work with, Chateau Pourri, where the guy has been literally cleaning out a recycled, old stock of wine bottles by hand to be able to put his wine in bottles. So those are the kinds of things people are doing to get through this.
But I'm glad you mentioned the positive, which is that when you're describing this quick ability to help your neighbor or help your friend or your relative or whatever. The Lebanese are very good at that, maybe too good at that. And it reminds me of, I mean, my earliest memories of Tripoli are in the mid 1980s. So mid 1980s, technically, the civil war had ended in Tripoli, more or less.
Yeah.
Ended in a very sort of dysfunctional way, but the fighting on the streets had more or less disappeared, more or less. But I mean, long blackouts, hyperinflation. The lira jumped quickly. The lira hit 3,000 lira by the early 1990s before it was stabilized at 1,500. And we didn't have large notes. Just had sort of the 50, the 100, and the 250, and would roll them up in these rubber bands. Eventually, the 500 was printed, and the 1,000, and later. But I mean, it's the same kind of can't trust the local currency, and people were desperate to use other currency, and the dollar sort of flooded the market. The unwillingness to even count on anything that feels like state authority. Knowing that the state back then was really in horrible shape anyway, but even if there was some restructuring, you wouldn't count on it. You wouldn't count on the government. So you'd count on relatives abroad.
Yeah.
You'd count on the population, not public authority.
Yeah.
And that back then always seemed to be a necessity because of the Civil War years. But we're now 30 years beyond the Civil War. And I've had this conversation with several friends recently that it's just, there's no fighting on the streets. But other than that, it really reminds me, and I think it reminds many people, of the worst years of modern Lebanese history. And that's during the Civil War, just without the fighting. There's a piece that you wrote, I think it's maybe early June. June 3rd. It's financial civil war pushes Lebanon to the brink. And I started using that quote. I sort of quoted you to friends. I'm like, this is a financial civil war. It feels like a civil war. There's no gunshots, but instead money is the weapon, so to speak. And I've sensed this now, that it may be too late to curtail hyperinflation, and we may see something catastrophic. We may see the lira plunge into something that we just can't control. And 10,000 may be the good old days when we look back. Now, I don't want to sound too bleak here, but I'm going to gauge your mind on just what is the way forward to at least stabilizing how bad we are right now and not letting things get worse.
I don't want to go too deep into this because you've had people much more qualified to talk about, the nuts and bolts. But, what I have seen and report on is, of course, the government came up with this plan to try to right the ship, which was basically to shave off some money from the accounts of the people who profited the most from, questionable financial practices of the past. And I think Alain Bifani, he kind of went right into it in his outgoing interview, where he said, we weren't asking for that much in the grand scheme of things. Mm-hmm. But the idea was that, regular people right now are paying the bill, and the bulk of the bill after the meal for when there's, a few people in the room that can and probably morally should do their part to fix things. And I think there was a lot of people working really hard behind the scenes to get the government to adopt this plan, which, you could say is like the Peter Pan model or whatever. But
is that the working phrase for it? I've never heard that. I like that though. The Peter Pan model.
Steal from the rich and give to the poor. And there was a lot of, there was a lot of controversy, of course, because what the banks argued was that, there are people who've worked their whole lives, whatever, in the Gulf,
Yeah.
wherever, to build up their life savings and save it, and you're going to shave off their money. And I think what Alain tried to say is no, it's going to be the really big wigs. And the alternatives that have been presented, the Association of Banks plan, one of the proposals was to basically privatize state assets, naming specifically the coast, which is already littered with illegal private resorts and nearly inaccessible to regular people. So, it's till now, nothing's budging. It seems that, and that was why these two guys resigned, because this plan seems to have been made an orphan in the parliament, because, there's a lot of people with interest in that not happening. And so here we are, where regardless, people's accounts are kind of being forcibly converted into lira. I think something like half of the country's savings was in dollar-denominated accounts. They thought they were playing it safe by putting it in dollars, and that turns out not to be true. So it's a huge issue, because with the kind of defeat of this plan and the non-action with the IMF, I think the French foreign minister said, nothing is moving. The other day or today. This is a huge problem, because if there's no light at the end of the tunnel, then that really means there's no anchor for anything. And yes, the currency could just keep dropping if there's no strategy or plan or policy in sight. So right now, everyone seems to be kind of sitting around and looking at each other. But I think we need to realize that there's also people that benefit from this. One man's floor is another man's ceiling. So if you have your money outside the country right now in foreign currency, and suddenly the value of everything in the country is dropping, and assets are up for sale, I'm not saying that it's this, kind of, I don't want to make it sound like this is a plan, but I mean, it's not necessarily hurting everyone, the situation.
But I hope I got this right. I'm getting from you that there is a big political problem that's not being addressed, and therefore the economic reforms cannot happen. In other words, it's just sort of waiting. And I like that you mentioned, you have so many great pieces that I've been reading the last few months. I'm just going to cite another one. Lebanon's troubled banks set sights on state assets. And I actually did not know the figure, that there's a $40 billion estimate there. And that the banks are even proposing this to begin with. If there's no political reform in the country, is that almost the last resort? That this is the way to, quote, save a sinking ship? Even though it's the worst way possible, it'll disfigure Lebanon permanently. But that's, short of reform, that's all that's left.
I from what my conversations with economists and bankers, it's not even necessarily viable. That $40 billion figure, it was put there with almost no detail. Who valued anything at that? What assets are on the table? I mean, you have all these assets that are in the red, the electricity company for one. Middle East is barely breaking even. So who says they're worth what they say they're worth? Who would want to buy a piece of the coast right now when 90% of the sewage gets dumped off the coast untreated? I mean, let's be a little bit realistic. So I don't even know if that is a saving grace. I mean, they also talk about the gold that Lebanon has. It seems like everyone in parliament is on the same page
Mm-hmm.
at avoiding kind of an accounting, an audit from the outside,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. And I think, of course, you know, Hassan Nasrallah mentioned China, would be interested to do projects. And even here in Tripoli, as you probably know, there was a lot of hope that China would invest big, especially in the port, in a train connection between Lebanon and Syria, and that, the Syria reconstruction one day would benefit Tripoli, which has, kind of been left behind out of a lot of things. But with the Caesar sanctions, you can really forget that. And Sybil Rizk, the policy director at Kuluna Irada,
Yes.
She made the point that whether it's the IMF or China,
Lebanon
needs
you need a functioning state
as one hand.
Right, exactly.
And right now, that doesn't exist.
That reminds me of when the Turkish government, with all its problems, but it's sort of maybe a similar sort of negotiating strategy the Chinese would use. And the Turks in 2000 and this may have been 2005, all the way to 2008 or so. It lasted for a few years. That there's even a plaque. There's a plaque at Tripoli's train station, sort of thanking the Turkish government for an inauguration, that the Turks were going to reestablish the link from Tripoli all the way to Istanbul and beyond. It never happened. But it's even like there's a ribbon and there's a ceremony and all that. Never happened. And yeah, of course. I mean, I fully agree with her with that assessment. You need to negotiate. You need a negotiating partner. And I also sense that the resignations are born out of that. That there's nothing, you can't work with this. There's no negotiation. Or there's no healthier negotiation here. This is just corruption and theft at the end of the day. But that
also some people not feeling the pain. There's an interview that went viral a couple of weeks ago, I think it was. I forget the name of the guy. He has this huge foods company. They basically make all the chips that are sold in Lebanon. And he was saying, oh no, Lebanon's still cheap. Me and some friends went out. Our bill was only $350,000. Beer was like $20,000. I mean, beer used to be, a beer out could be like $6,000, $5,000.
Mm-hmm.
So to have somebody saying that on TV, just a total, I don't know what you call it, lack of awareness, lack of caring.
Mm-hmm.
Does this person have no one in their circle that's hurting at all? It's hard to say, but there's definitely people that aren't feeling the pain. So that could be part of it. And yeah, people that could stand to benefit from the situation. But I think we also need to say that, even wealthy people are going to see their standard of living go down. It's only the super, super rich, I think, that are going to be,
But when you say they're not feeling pain, are you referring to just sort of like an MP who has not been hit directly yet in that sense? It's more like they don't feel the need to act yet?
Yeah, I guess they don't feel financial pain. So it's really hard. It's hard to understand. But I think, it's not, of course, it's not just that. It's that you need everybody to be on the same page. Lebanon isn't ruled, It's on an authoritarian state. There's many different parties, many different interests. That's one of the reasons why Lebanon couldn't unlock these said funds that were, pledged in Paris years ago. Mm-hmm. I think about $11 billion, because, a lot of people feel like they couldn't figure out how to divide up the pie.
Yeah.
So there's many things at stake here.
I enjoyed reading some other pieces that relate to the story, but they're more, in a way, they're stories that I'm not always in tune with, and that includes Lebanese abroad. that still have their money stuck in Lebanon. And it's a story that I thought, I mean, it's funny. It's sort of just something I assume it's there, and then no, it's a lot bigger than one would think. That you have a couple that's been trying to sue the state and sue the central bank in particular, and that all their assets or their dollars are locked in Lebanon. And do you sense that these things have just begun? That there's going to be more of this later? Because it can't just be one couple sort of making a lot of noise. There must be hundreds of thousands, if not more, Lebanese in the diaspora that are also sort of stuck. They're not in Lebanon, but their life savings are in Lebanon. And do you sense that there'll be more pressure on that front? That this is sort of like another tool that can be used to sort of move things forward a bit?
Well, I wonder if that couple had been reading the Asia Times, because I had previously written a story quoting a legal expert here, a lawyer, who basically made the point that while de facto capital controls have been in place since the banks had an unprecedented 2-week closure during the protests.
Yes. Yeah.
That didn't even happen during the Civil War, as I'm told.
Right. Yeah.
And probably shows you how spooked they were about the situation. Till now, there's no capital controls law. So while all of these things are arbitrary, the fact that people can't take out as much as they want, the fact that people who had dollar deposits can't access them, this is all just arbitrary. And, banks have different ways to decide who can withdraw. If you have a track record, for example, of, being an importer, if you have a track record of paying a tuition, supposedly that's who is able to keep going with those transfers. So there are certain guidelines, but there's no hard rule.
Right.
And since September, I'll have to refer back to the piece, but I mean, billions have gone out.
Since September, right? Yes, absolutely. I forget.
1 to 2 billion a month.
Yeah.
That just shows, and the head, I think it was of the Byblos Bank research section, was even speaking about this and saying we wanted capital controls because we have nothing to protect us. If somebody sues you, if someone has the wherewithal to sue the bank, then they can get their money. There's nothing legally to stop them. And so this couple in the story that I wrote, the funny thing is they claimed to have been convinced by a close friend working as some bank branch manager in Lebanon that they should put their money in Lebanon and everything would be fine and they would be able to take it out within that year. And they were not able to. Right. And so you have this is like, I think they had something like 18 million spread out over different banks, and they were, attracted by the high interest rates.
Yep.
And you have also people with, that had $18,000 or, $800 who are also attracted by the high interest rates and convinced. Some people are blaming these people for being naive when such rates are quite rare. But I think we also have to recognize that there was a huge faith in the banking sector. They survived the Civil War. They, had the appearance of doing well, and the dollar peg was maintained at all costs.
But it's just the fact that there is a lawsuit, that there is a couple doing something that has not happened in Lebanon, obviously.
So
for many
if you
reasons.
get your case in the pipeline, any capital controls can't be applied retroactively.
Right.
So it's very smart to put a claim,
right?
So that legally you could hope to get some of your money back.
But
I think what's happening right now is anyone with the wherewithal or the connections is trying to get their dollars out,
right?
And everybody else is, really in deep trouble.
Is that what you got a sense from when you were writing this piece, that there's many people doing this, just sort of maybe quietly, that they're putting their cases with knowing that this is maybe the last chance they can try to at least sue if they,
The lawyer I spoke to, Paul Morcos, wouldn't put a number on it, but he said he had a large caseload. Of
Okay,
people
so
like,
so there is something there.
but this would be people with a lot of money, though.
Okay, so it's the larger accounts, right? Right.
Right. I mean, if you have a smaller account, the lawyer fee might dissuade you.
Yeah.
From doing this. So it's really this situation really hurts the little guy.
Yeah, of course, of course. But that's what I appreciate in your pieces and in other pieces as well, that there is a focus on the most vulnerable in Lebanon. And I sense that, I mean, now the middle class is part of that vulnerable, huge portion of Lebanese society. That there's just sort of a very, very wealthy upper class that is vulnerable too, but not as exposed necessarily. And then you have that sort of widening lower middle and lower class that is feeling the pain the most. And I think Oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's just it's really it's something I've never seen to witness the total total destruction of a middle class of a country. This is not, of course, we've been reporting for years about, the plight of the most vulnerable, whether it's the refugees, whether it's the domestic workers who, are suffering doubly right now.
Yeah.
But right now we're seeing the middle class, I can't see it surviving through this. People who could have a pretty good standard of living, maybe even travel once a year, maybe even attend not the best private school, but try to get ahead. That's going to be very difficult. And that's basically, there's two reasons. There's the crisis in Lebanon, but there's also this global recession. So there's not going to be these easy money jobs in the Gulf anymore.
Yeah.
And if the population is less educated, they'll be less competitive. And if they're poorer, they'll have to settle for less and be able to send home less. So it's really a huge, huge change. And I don't think we've felt the whole implication yet.
It's a big tragedy in that in the 1990s, the conversation was always the middle class needs to return. And that sort of Civil War generation of Lebanese that were able to leave, maybe a certain number of them returned. And there was that kind of hope always that post-war era would improve over time. And then, it never materialized. But the middle class was already vulnerable and small after the war ended, and now it's, like you said, it's on its way out, and that's you need that middle class for any sort of for the health of any society. You need that sizable middle class. It should be the largest.
And someone pointed out that you need the banks as well. You need a banking sector.
Sure, of course.
If you want to, whatever, buy a house or take out a loan, start, help Lebanon transition to having a productive industrial sector, people need to be able to get loans. So, I don't think anyone is celebrating the state of the banking sector. And I think it's really imperative that things get moving if Lebanon's going to be able to recover from this. And it seems like there are a lot of countries that would like Lebanon to succeed, but the sanctions, the use of sanctions and the increasing use of sanctions in the region has an effect. It has an effect on the ability to move goods, even if it's not targeting the movement of fruits and vegetables. And for example, the sanctions on Syria, I think that kind of makes this port project impossible because, the Chinese, at the end of the day, America, till now, is far more important for them than any country in this region as a trading partner.
Mhm.
So are they going to go in big in Tripoli anytime soon? I don't think so. So it's there's a lot going against Lebanon, but I think that most people would agree that they could do a lot better than this.
I'm going to wrap it up with maybe a lighter note. I'm curious about you. Never really asked you this, and
I'm curious about you.
oh well.
When are you coming back?
You're good.
I'm the journalist. I should be asking you the questions.
That is true. That is true.
Your podcast.
Yeah, I came here and I got stuck in New York during COVID-19. I just sort of ended. My trip back obviously didn't happen in April, so I couldn't fly back. And I'd like to be back by the end of the year, and I'd like to check out your place too. And but I'm curious about someone like you, who showed up in Lebanon 9 years ago, 2012, given many opportunities to leave Lebanon and explore different terrain in the world of journalism. And I know you mentioned earlier that you were in the Gulf for a while, but you found your way back to Lebanon. That you don't have to be there per se, but you're sticking it out, and you're there during a very challenging time, and you're putting your own sort of you're investing in the economy, if you will, and in a very small individual way, but you're involved in the Lebanese economy. You're part of a pub in Mina. What keeps you in Lebanon, and why is the Lebanese story sort of part of your life, if you will? What keeps you sort of in tune, and what makes you stick it out in Lebanon?
Well, I've noticed that in recent years, a lot of my colleagues have kind of made their young careers out here, have gone to the U.S. To cover whether it was the 2016 election or what's going on right now. I would personally prefer a Lebanese journalist go to the U.S. to cover my country, because it's a little bit too close to home for me. I don't think I'd.
Is there an exchange program? You just sort of send a local to DC and cover the news.
Why not?
Yeah, why not? No, but your relationship to Lebanon.
They speak English.
That's true. No, but I'm curious about your relationship to Lebanon. What has kept you there? I mean, and what keeps you there now? Knowing that you can easily leave if you wanted to, but you're still there, and you're writing on Lebanon, and you're focusing on Lebanon. What is it about the country that makes you curious?
I think that there's of course my mom's side of the family that has Armenian background, so you have this kind of affinity,
Yeah.
and people don't treat you like an outsider when they know that about you.
Right.
So I think there's definitely this warmth and affection, and I still find interesting stories, and I feel like the more I report, the more I realize how little I know. So I feel like I'm only just starting to become what the kind of journalist I'd like to be, which is somebody who's not sticking to what I know, somebody who's interviewing people who aren't at the protests just as much as I'm interviewing people who are at the protests.
Right.
And I feel like I've learned or I've decided how I want to report over years of doing this. And so I feel like it's not really the time I want to leave it, when I feel like I'm just starting to decide how I think it should be done.
For me, Lebanon, and I'm not saying this as someone from there or has any family connection, nothing like that, just pure subjective analysis. It's the perfect place to write a story and to share a story. And there's so many stories happening all the time. And I always get drawn back to that part of the world. for any story that interests me or any story I'd like to share. So it's always been I think the perfect location, and it adds so much to any story, and I can't replicate that anywhere else.
And you know what I
Yeah.
think also? Lebanon having this middle class and not being a country where it's, rich and poor. I mean, this is a country where you can, you're going to have Lebanese friends. You're going to, you can feel at home.
Yeah.
Whereas there's a lot of countries in the region where, especially in the Gulf, it's very limited where your interactions can be with local society, or where you might be kind of elevated to a class of society because you can afford it because of your purchasing power. But I don't know, Lebanon, you really you can really like make a community here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is, and no, it's a without being overly romantic, I mean, the place has everything. There's everyone talks about the potential. I don't want to be cliche, but you can have a lot here.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that Lebanon can do, I think.
I couldn't say it better than that. I'm going to visit Aristo's next time I'm in town. And I really appreciate you staying up so late to even have this conversation with me. And I know these are very painful topics. You're living through them yourself. Since January, I've been watching them from afar. This is a very pessimistic moment, but I appreciate having voices like yours shared, because you've dedicated your life to the country in different ways. And it's always nice to hear somebody committed to the country share their own thoughts on what's happening. So I really appreciate that. Thank you, Alison.
It'd be great to have you.
Oh, cheers. Well, yeah. The 3 p.m. coffee to the 10 p.m. wine. Cheers to you. Thanks for listening. And a friendly reminder to help support this podcast by contributing through Patreon or PayPal. All links are in the details box below. Until next time, I'm Ronnie Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.